Hello guys, it's Chunker here doing another Bakugan video. This time, I want to talk about how Darkus dominated BakuTech. Now, the interesting thing is, this wasn't always the case, but as BakuTech ended, it was pretty clear that Darkus was the best attribute. So I want to talk about how we got there and just how overpowered it actually is. Now, I'm not going to go in depth with every single Darkus Bakugan. Some of them just don't really move the needle for Darkus, like, at all, so those I'll just kind of gloss over, but I will mention every Darkus Bakugan and talk about what they did and were there any Bakugan around the time that were comparable or, you know, maybe gave them some trouble. So first up, we have the first ever Darkus Bakugan and one of the two first Bakugan just in BakuTech in general, which is Destroy Minicus. So Destroy Minicus was pretty good. Even today it's a solid Bakugan, but it was known for its curve shot ability. Of course, having the metal soul pieces was advantageous, the general shape of it. It just worked well for curve shots. Now, you could still straight shot this thing, put metal in the cross pieces and whatnot, and do that, but it wasn't quite as good as something like Flare Dragon for that, so generally speaking, curve shots were what this thing excelled at, and yeah, it was good at it. Was it as good as Flare Dragon just in general, though? It was close, but I'd say Flare Dragon was slightly better still. I mean, straight shots are also just easier to deal with than curve shots, so it was a lot easier to just pick up and learn, but Destroy Minicus was still a really good Bakugan for the time, and definitely a solid start for Darkus. But things definitely picked up quite a bit with the next release, being Diocivic. Diocivic was interesting in that it was actually the first ever time that we saw a Bakugan release in an attribute that already had a Bakugan. This was the 6th ever BakuTech release, and the second Darkus release, and like I said, first time we saw an attribute get more than one Bakugan. And Diocivic was a really good Bakugan. This thing could attack. I mean, it had, you know, a lot of metal. So you had two cross pieces, these two built-in metal pieces, and also you had Savic just sitting inside. So this thing, you know, decently heavy, pretty good attacker. Defensively, I mean, you had this like claw on the back as well. It had parts touching the ground. While it's not a defensive Bakugan, it does have that defensive utility in that it is harder to move than you might expect, which does make it pretty solid. But this thing was also a bit of a menace in terms of G-power battles. This thing could range from 580 to 600 Gs. At the time, this was actually fairly high. I mean, things like Grand Panzer that just released before typically maxed around 560, and even things after like St. Aquas were around 540, so this thing was a really good G-power battler, and with Savic, which can give it plus 200 Gs, this thing was a bit of a problem. Yes, Savic was kind of hard to deal with, but it was still something that you could potentially have as a bonus, meaning you would be anywhere between 780 and 800 Gs, which was just impossible to deal with unless you had like a really good gate card setup. This thing could be an absolute nightmare to deal with. It was really good for its time. Even today, it's still like a pretty good Bakugan, I would say. But to have this be the second ever Darkus Bakugan in BakuTech, yeah, this thing was a pretty big problem. Now, after this, the third Bakugan was a little bit more normal with something like Zero Minicus. So Zero Minicus, I would say it's not as good at straight shots opposed to Destroy Minicus, but it's not like it ever excelled at that anyway, but just worth noting. But I do think it was better at curve shots and leaned further into that gimmick. Was it significantly better to jump up a tier or anything? Not really, just a bit better. But it's another Darkus Bakugan, and you can now have a full Darkus deck. Now, there aren't restrictions on using the same Bakugan in a deck, but I generally think it's best to, you know, use different Bakugan. There are exceptions like specific deck setups or just, you know, Dragon Dragon, which you can kind of just use 3 of, honestly, but anyway. This would allow you to have a full Darkus deck of unique Bakugan. Destroy and Zero were different, but still similar, but you had Diocivic as well, so overall, you had a pretty good deck. It was the first attribute that you could have a full deck of with unique Bakugan, and yeah, it was just another good Darkus Bakugan. And the trend would continue with our next Bakugan, of course, being Bone Skulls. Bone Skulls is a bit of a menace as well, because this thing, as you can see, it's fairly large. Is this the best defense occupancy Bakugan ever? No, because it's fairly skinny. That said, for the time, it wasn't that bad. I mean, keep in mind, this is before things like Acro Desert existed, so at the time, this was actually a pretty solid occupancy Bakugan, but nowadays, it's okay, but nothing crazy. But the main thing is this thing had a really good gate card, and when you landed on the gate card and went into a G-Power battle, it was a low G wins card. However, Bone Skulls on its own card is set to 0 Gs, which is just an auto win at that point. This made it pretty difficult to deal with, and was just kind of a troll Bakugan, and for the time, again, a pretty good defense occupancy Bakugan, which Darkus also kind of wanted. And, you know, even today, it's not bad. It's not great for that, but still okay. But again, with that gate card, it's still really good because of that. But, yeah, it's another option for Darkus, and it just further made this attribute a little overpowered. Now after this, Darkus does begin to struggle. So this is everything that we got kind of before the first actual season of BakuTech started. But with Season 1 of BakuTech, Darkus actually did begin to struggle a bit because we didn't see as many releases. Now, to start off, kind of the very beginning of Season 1 with the first 2 decks, the Darkus Bakugan that we got was Borg Mahesis. Now, Borg Mahesis is actually another good Darkus Bakugan. Now, it wasn't like top tier or anything, but as you can see, it's a fairly large Bakugan. Even today, not horrible for defense occupancy. Back then, it was actually, again, pretty solid though. It's pretty large. You get it like on the edge of the card here. This is going to block at least kind of decently. These parts do kind of move it still. But these back parts here on the card. So yeah, it does do a decent job at, you know, again, defense occupancy. And the more important part though is that the cross parts here, when you close it, they're at this angle, which gives it kind of a unique rolling pattern, which can, you know, work well. This thing could, you know, do well double stands because of that, but it's just overall a solid Bakugan. Again, unique rolling, some defense occupancy, which again, Darkus was kind of lacking. It was just this and Bone Skulls, so it definitely wasn't a bad option for Darkus, so definitely solid. But after this is where Darkus really begins to struggle, because right before Borg Mahesis came out, we actually had Gigantorada, which really helps to bolster Pyrus, because you already had things like Flare Dragon and Grand Dragon, which were really good, but now Gigantorada was arguably the best Bakugan released at this point. But a few months later, we would get the Rise deck and the Hollow deck. Having something like Rise Dragon, another Bakugan that I'd say was on par with Gigantorada, I think Pyrus kind of took over at this point as the best attribute, at least at the time. And we got the Hollow deck, but the Hollow deck was, something. Now, obviously something like Holomonicus is still good. I'd say this thing definitely falls off in terms of straight shots, but it doesn't really matter too much. This thing is, I'd say, the best Monicus for curve shots. But is it significantly better than Destroy or Zero? Does it move up a tier even? No, I'd say it's better than them, but not significantly like Rise was to Flare and Gren. So you're already a little bit behind there, but the deck filler Bakugan in the Hollow deck were not ideal. Now the Bakugan in the Rise deck, you know, they're nothing crazy either, but the ones in the Hollow deck were especially terrible because you had Shinazchi and Michael Laurel. Michael Laurel is the worst Bakugan in BakuTech. This thing is basically just a meme, if we're being honest, but yeah, anyway. Shinazchi could have been fine if it had like metal or like anything else going for it, but it doesn't, and it just exists and isn't great, so yeah, neither one of these Bakugan do anything to help this attribute. For the rest of Season 1, we'd really only just see a couple more Bakugan releasing in decks, which is kind of weird, but the first of which being in the Shield deck, Gravity Gnome. Gravity Gnome is just kind of there. Yes, we have 4 metal pieces, which is cool, but has like an awkward ridge when it's closed up, and makes it a little bit awkward to roll. It's still an okay Bakugan, but I don't think it's better than anything we've already seen, so I probably wouldn't use this in a full Darkus deck, you know, even with our current options. It's just not ideal, I don't think. So anyway, moving on, we have Dagger Otis. Now Dagger Otis is in the Wind deck, and it's not bad. It's a big Bakugan. Is it phenomenal for defense occupancy? No, but it's decent enough. And again, it's another big Bakugan that Darkus can use, so it's at least worth considering potentially. But is it anything great? Is it better than any of the first 4 Bakugan that we saw? I would probably say no. It's an option for sure, but still nothing that really helps Darkus to truly stand out. And this is kind of where Darkus would end up until like the very, very end of Season 1. And yeah, by this point, I feel like Pyrus was better because you had things like Kachiya Gale come out as well. Like Rise Dragon, G-Genera to Kachiya Gale, yeah. Darkus just doesn't really have anything to keep up with any of those, and even Aquas, I think, was making a bit of a push with something like Buddha Gil. So Darkus was definitely beginning to struggle, but now it did get a pretty nice buff at the very end of Season 1 with Size Tabnel. Now yes, Sex Tabnel exists and is very, very similar to this thing. I do slightly prefer Size Tabnel just because I prefer how the arms come out opposed to Sex Tabnel's wings. However, Sex Tabnel can be literally any attribute, so at that point, it doesn't matter a whole lot. Now, Size Tabnel is a lot easier to get, so it was preferable, because again, slightly better physically, and yes, it was way easier to get just a booster opposed to, you know, a promotional Bakugan, but still. Technically, every attribute can have something like this, so does this help Darkus? Yes, but was it as big of a help compared to what it could have been if it was just Size Tabnel? Definitely not. Now again, it is 6 metal pieces, so that is still pretty beneficial. This thing was really good, and you could definitely get a good Darkus deck with, you know, Size Tabnel and a few other Bakugan, but I don't think this puts Darkus back on top. Now, things only got worse in BakuTech Gachi, the second season, because Darkus was actually absent for more than half of it. The only exception to this was actually a deck filler with Warcry, and Warcry, well, these parts aren't actually cross pieces, so it's just a big piece of plastic that isn't very good, so this doesn't help Darkus at all, and yet Darkus just kind of was dormant until, like I said, later in the second half of Gachi, so with that in mind, a lot of other attributes started to take over. I mean, every other attribute got at least one really good Bakugan. I mean, Sotera had Jebafudo, Chaos had Nagadaja, Ventus had Nino de Shao. All of these, I think, were better than any Darkus Bakugan at that point, barring maybe Size Tabnel. And even then, that would only really apply to Nino de Shao, so yeah, it wasn't ideal. Things like Aquas and Pyrus were definitely better. I mean, Pyrus already had things like, you know, Giga Horus, which is another good attacker, but also Dragon Dragon, the best Bakugan in the game, even today. Aquas was also better than Darkus by this point, because like I already mentioned, you had Buddha Gil, but also you had both of the 36mm Aquas Bakugan before Darkus got anything. You had Gogaryu and Barry Beyond, so Aquas was better than Darkus at this point. But once Darkus started to actually get 36mm releases, well, things certainly did change. The first of these was, of course, Yoran Shafor. Now, Yoran Shafor is really good. It's a top 3 occupancy Bakugan. I'd probably put it at 3rd, but still, it's really, really good. Definitely top tier. And also has some utility with other modes, mainly being able to, you know, get small, so you can use it with double stands and stuff, but it's a really, really good occupancy Bakugan. Better than Acro Desert or Daifujo. This thing was great. Now, does it put Darkus back to number 1? I don't know about that, but it definitely helps Darkus a lot. And then shortly after, we got yet another 36mm Darkus Bakugan in Sanzu Halibos. This thing is in contention with being the best attacker in BakuTech. It's really between Sanzu Halibos and Gogaryu. I think most people would prefer Gogaryu. I personally prefer Sanzu Halibos, but still, having a top 2 attacker, a top tier Bakugan, that is definitely helping Darkus. And at this point, Darkus is making a solid case for why it's the best attribute again. Is it for sure? I don't know about that, but it's definitely making a solid case with having a great attacker. I mean, Sanzu Halibos is heavier than the Tabnels by a pretty decent amount. It's the heaviest Bakugan in the game, so this is a really nice thing for Darkus to get. And then, not long after this, we get Ozpress. Ozpress is another top 3 occupancy Bakugan, either first or second. I'd say Nagadaja is the best occupancy Bakugan for just pure defense occupancy, but Ozpress, the way it opens, it can kind of like just, that's a little awkward, but it can definitely like push things off of the card. Now, it does struggle against like actually good defense occupancy Bakugan, or just heavy Bakugan. So it's not like a perfect attacker or anything. I wouldn't use it for attack, but it does still have attack as good utility for sure, and it can push things off of the card. I mean, in Gachi, you roll at the same time, so if you both open up on the same card, this thing can definitely just push it off, so it has that utility, which is very good. But again, yet another top tier Bakugan for defense occupancy. At this point, I think Darkus was back to being the best attribute, because with this, Yonanchu 4, Sanzu Halibos, some of those other good 32mm Bakugan, this attribute was definitely doing something right, but it gets even better because you get yet another 36mm Bakugan, the only attribute to actually hit 4, that being Zeta Municus. This thing is great, and we actually get this thing to be even better by using the Friendship Bind set version of Zeta Municus. Now, Zeta Municus as a Bakugan, with the metal down here, you can use this thing for curve shot still. I don't think it's as good as the other Bakugan in the Municus line, but it's still good enough. And beyond that, it's still a solid Bakugan all around. Like, it's a solid attacker, has enough defense, nothing crazy, but still, it's good. But the main thing here is that this one has 730 Gs, which is why I'd prefer to use this one. This is the highest G power printed in BakuTech, barring Bakugan armors, but still. So this thing is a bit of a G power powerhouse, and it gets better because the Zeta Roulette adds more G power. You have a 4 in 8 chance of hitting 10 Gs, so this thing can be 740 Gs at least. A 2 in 8 chance of hitting on 20 Gs, so 750 Gs, which is really good. A 1 in 8 chance of being plus 40 Gs, 770 Gs, that's really good, and then a 1 in 8 chance of hitting on 200 Gs, 930 Gs, that's the highest possible G power you can even get without bringing cards into the mix, so this thing is pretty crazy. Is it the best G power battler outside of armors? Probably, although that's a bit contentious, which we'll get to, but still, it's really, really good. It's a solid Bakugan with great G power battling capabilities. This thing, at this point, Darkus is really just the best attribute. Honestly, the only argument that you could make against Darkus at this point was really that it doesn't have Dragon Dragon, the best Bakugan in the game. Well, unfortunately, it does, because we had the God 3 set release, which gives us Jaiba Dragon, which you can just mix back into Dragon Dragon if you want to, and we can go back to the Friendship Bind set to grab this specific Dragon piece from this Dragon Dragon, and what you can do here is by taking these specific parts and getting this bind set up here, you now have a Darkus Dragon Dragon, which is 720 Gs, and this Dragon piece is plus 30. You now have a 750 G Dragon Dragon. This is the best setup. I mean, there's a Pyrus one like this that's 750 as well, but still. The best setup of Dragon can be either Pyrus or Darkus with, of course, 750 Gs, so yeah, that is funny. If Darkus wasn't already too overpowered, it definitely is now. Because you know the best Bakugan in the game in its highest G form. This is why I did say Zeta Municus is arguably the best, because this Dragon Dragon beats it 4 out of 8 times. I mean, if it gets 740 Gs, this thing wins at 750. And then Zeta ties 2 of 8 times, and then wins 2 of 8 times at either 770 or 930. But still, this thing is really good, and it's also consistent. You really can't go wrong with this. This is just the best Bakugan in BakuTech, so having it in Darkus just solidifies its position at the top. Now after this, there is Bakugan Armors, which is generally paired into BakuTech, especially because there's so few releases. Now with Bakugan Armors, you can swap the attribute arm, however, it can be advantageous to just keep it in stock because, well, if the attribute arm and skill arm are paired together, it generally just rolls straighter, which is nice, but anyway. For the sake of this video, I will just count armors as everything is in stock. So, in that sense, Yashadagaris is our Darkus Armors Bakugan, and this thing is really good for many reasons. First up, it does come with metal soul pieces, which is always nice. It again is Darkus, and even if you swap things around, you two get 2 of the best pieces for Bakugan armors. You get the best core and arguably the best skill arm. Core can be 770 Gs, the highest printed G power in Japan ever. And then the skill arm is free select, and free select allows you to just choose a second attribute bonus. So you get your first one, of course, on the gate card with your attribute, and then just a second one, whichever. This just completely outclasses ×2, plus win, plus slate. Plus 100 can be better in some instances if you have an all 0G gate card. That just gives you, plus 100, but still, generally speaking, this is better. Overraid and Blowaway are really good. You could argue those are better, but those are field related, so they're different. They're better in different situations, but just, if you have to say what's the best, I just say free select because you get 2 gate bonuses. So you just steal your opponent's bonus, and because you have the highest G power in the game at 770, you just win. This thing just wins. It's the best G power battler, without question. Physically, it's not great like all armor Bakugan, but the fact that it can battle as well as it does in G power battles, it doesn't matter too much. I mean, it does, but it's still, it's just too good, so this thing's ridiculous, and adding armors in just makes Darkus even better. At this point, Darkus just has literally everything. You have the best Bakugan in the game with Dragon Dragon, you have the best G-Power battler with Yashitagaris, you have another really good G-Power battler with potentially the highest G-Power in the game, barring cards, Zeta Municus. You have 2 of the 3 best defense accuracy Bakugan with Yoden Shafor and Ozpress. You have arguably the best attacker in the game with Sensu Holobos. You have a bunch of good 32mm Bakugan as well, things like Size Tavenal, Destroymanicus, Zeromanicus, Holomanicus, Borg Mahesis, Bone Skulls, Deus Civic. Yeah, Darkus is the best attribute. It may have struggled for a little while in Gachi until it started to actually get 36mm Bakugan, but once it did, it just didn't stop, and well, yeah, I think you kind of see why it became as overpowered as it is. I've talked about some of this stuff before, but I just thought I'd do a whole video talking about Darkus because it's pretty interesting, and it was way too dominant for what it was. There was no reason for it to be like this, but it was, and here we are. Obviously, BakuTech has been done for a long time, Armors has been done for over a decade, so this is everything we're ever going to get for BakuTech, and Darkus will forever just be way above everything else, so I guess that's that. So anyways, thanks for watching, and bye-bye.